I heard my niece yelling, "He's AFT. That's like a girl." I asked where she heard that. She said her dad calls me that all the time. This morning, my sister texted me, "You're overreacting." Hey everyone. I hope you don't mind any mistakes in my English since it's not my first language. I'm a 29-year-old man, and my wife, who is 30, and I have 2 sons, aged 5 and 3. My wife works full-time in an office, while I work remotely with a highly flexible schedule. As long as I meet my deadlines, no one is concerned about how many hours I work or when, aside from a few scheduled Zoom meetings. My 26-year-old sister, whom I'll call Barb, and her husband, Nick, 30M, live nearby and also work full-time. They have a 5-year-old daughter, Tracy. Since I have a flexible work schedule, we decided that I would drop off and pick up Tracy from daycare along with my own kids. I didn't mind at all and actually thought it was great for my children to spend more time with their cousin. I also get along well with Tracy and always assumed she saw me as the fun uncle. She's a sweet and generally well-behaved child. Most days, after picking them up, I bring Tracy and my kids to our house, prepare snacks or dinner for them, and then my sister comes to pick Tracy up in the afternoon or evening. A few days ago the 5-year-old kids were watching Bluey on the TV as I was preparing snacks with my 3-year-old and I suddenly heard yelling. I rushed over to see what's up and my son was yelling at her that, "My dad's not a girl," while my niece yells back, "He is. He's AF *********. That's like a girl." The word is different in my language but the meaning holds, as is the distinction between using it versus simply addressing a gay person. At first, I was in shock, but I quickly turned off the TV, sat her down, and calmly explained that the word she used was very inappropriate and that we should never call people that. I also clarified that, aside from it being a bad word, I'm not a girl. I told her that because it's a mean thing to say, she should apologize since we treat each other with kindness in this family. I also warned her that if I ever heard her say it again, I would have to talk to her parents, and she would get in trouble. She confidently responded that she wouldn't get in trouble because her dad calls me that, and nothing happens to him. I was taken aback. I told her that no matter what her dad says, it's still an offensive word, and she shouldn't use it with me or in my presence. I also reminded her that even if someone else said it, it still hurt my feelings, so she should apologize, which she did because she's actually a great kid. As we kept talking, I gently asked her about other things she had heard from her parents. Though getting reliable information from a 5-year-old is tricky, I gathered that my brother-in-law, Nick, had made comments in front of Tracy, saying that men shouldn't stay home and take care of kids, that cooking and cleaning are a woman's responsibility, and that most of what I do around the house is women's work. He also apparently said I'm a girl, which I take to mean that he doesn't see me as a real man, because I do housework while my wife earns more than me. I did my best to explain to Tracy that both men and women can work from an office or from home and that just because my wife and Barb work long hours outside the house, that doesn't make them men, just like me working from home doesn't make me any less of one. However, I didn't push the conversation too much because it's not her fault, and I didn't want to put too much pressure on her. I didn't immediately bring it up with my sister because I figured it would be a difficult conversation and I didn't want to have it in front of the kids, and I wanted to talk it out with my wife first as well. I did talk to my wife that evening and she seemed really upset as well. I told her that I think I should demand an apology from Nick and my sister, and she agreed. I called my sister and told her what happened, and she said that it's just a word and I'm blowing it out of proportion, and obviously Nick doesn't dislike me. I said I don't care whether he does or doesn't dislike me. He is talking shit about me behind my back to my niece and to her, and she is apparently very chill about this, rather than standing up for me. She said that was how Nick was, and I should stop being a drama queen. I told her to fuck off and if that was how she felt she could pick up her own child from daycare, and hung up. I know it was really short notice and rude, but I really felt like I was being disrespected by people I did so much for over the years, and were my family. My wife said she understood, and that I shouldn't back down until I at least get a proper apology. The next 2 days were a weekend and there was no daycare. I assumed there would be calls or texts from Barb, but there was nothing. In fact, the suspicious lack of any messages or calls made me think she didn't take my words seriously, and this actually got me even more angry. When it was time to pick up Tracy for daycare, the calls started coming in, but I didn't go. I dropped off my own kids as usual but ignored the calls for a while. I know it was a bit petty, but after stewing over it for 2 days, I figured letting Barb do the same for a few hours was fair, and honestly, it felt pretty satisfying. Around noon, when she called again, I finally picked up. My plan was to smugly tell her I was waiting for my apology so we could move on, but I didn't even get the chance. Instead, she immediately started going off on me, accusing me of being irresponsible and unreliable. She was furious that she had been late to work because I flaked. I simply responded, I told you I wasn't going to pick her up. You had 2 days to make other arrangements. But she kept yelling, so I just hung up. She kept calling and sending texts, insisting that I pick Tracy up from daycare. I stood my ground, responding that I wouldn't be doing that, then stopped replying altogether. Later, when I arrived to pick up my kids, Tracy was expecting me to take her home as well. It was tough, for both of us. She's just 5, and suddenly, she wasn't coming over to play and have snacks like usual. But at the same time, I didn't want to just brush everything under the rug. I still felt like I deserved an apology, and I still do. I gently explained to her that her mom and I were having a disagreement, but once we worked things out, I'd start picking her up again. She was understandably upset, because, again, she's 5, but I apologized, took my kids, and left. Well, a bit later I got a call from my mom. Barb roped her into picking up Tracy, but my mom is disabled, so she was having a really hard time with Tracy, and asked me why I was being mean to Barb. I told her everything, expecting her to take my side, but instead she also pulled a, you know how Nick is, to which I replied that the more I realize how Nick is the less I like it, and if he thinks all this shit in general and about me specifically, I sure as fuck ain't going to be doing free labor for him. She said I was blowing this all out of proportion, and I told her I wasn't the one doing it, because all I asked for was a fucking apology, and everyone else seemed to prefer all of this shit to just giving it to me, to which she said I should just be the bigger man and not let it get to me, to which I said I was done and to have fun with Tracy. That evening, I got a call from Nick. I was hesitant to answer, but I figured there was a small chance I might finally get the apology I was waiting for. Nope. Instead, he started saying that my behavior was causing Barb a lot of distress and asked how I could do this to my own sister, since we're family. I shot back that if family mattered so much, then why was he badmouthing me to his daughter, the same child I take care of every day? He brushed it off, saying he was just joking and that it was all in good fun. I made it clear that it was neither good nor fun for me, and I still expected an apology. That's when he lost it. He started insulting me, calling me a slur and saying I was a hysterical little girl who couldn't take a joke. I told him to screw off, said I was done with him, and hung up. After that, Barb and my mom started blowing up my phone, but I ignored their calls. Barb then texted me, saying it wasn't fair for Tracy to suffer just because I was being petty. I responded that it wasn't fair for Tracy to suffer because her parents were ungrateful jerks. She fired back with a bunch of angry messages about how she was going to lose her job and how I was being cruel to both her and our mom. At that point, I told her I was done. I said that unless her next message was an apology, I'd block her number. She didn't apologize, so I blocked her. For the past few days, my mom has been the one picking up Tracy, and it's been rough. Seeing Tracy at daycare and telling her that grandma will be taking her home, when she clearly hates it, breaks my heart. She keeps telling me she's not having fun with grandma and wants to come over to our place. And honestly, I hate this. But at the same time, I haven't received a single apology from anyone except the 5-year-old. If I just let this go, I feel like it would send the message that my family can walk all over my boundaries without consequences. At the same time, I love my niece. I don't want to hurt her, traumatize her, or make her resent me. She's a great kid, and none of this is her fault. So, am I the asshole? And, what should I do? Edit. Wow, I can't believe how much support and advice I've received in just 4 hours, thank you all so much. I hadn't really considered the possibility that Nick might actually want Barb to quit her job, but now that you mention it, it does seem plausible, and that really worries me. That said, there's not much I can do until Barb at least acknowledges that that's just how Nick is, so stop overreacting isn't an acceptable excuse. I also have a feeling my mom won't be able to keep picking up Tracy for long. She's already struggling with it, so I hope I'll get the chance to talk to Barb about everything. Ideally, she'll come around because she genuinely sees my point of view, but if it happens out of sheer desperation, I'll take it. I'm not sure what kind of childcare options they can afford, especially since they're already struggling with a mortgage on a house that's stretching their finances thin. Most importantly, I'll make sure Tracy knows that I love her and none of this is her fault. Again, thank you all. Relevant comments. Someone suggested that OOP shouldn't cut off contact with his niece but should have serious discussions with Nick and Barb about the way they talk about family. OOP, I really want to do that, but how do I go about it? Should I keep picking her up while going no contact with the rest of them outside of that? I don't want to punish her for their actions, but how can I stand up for myself without it affecting her? On why OOP's 5-year-old isn't in school yet. OOP, they, Tracy and my son, will be starting school next year. My son recently turned 5 and wasn't eligible yet, and Barb and Nick decided to wait so the kids could start school together. On whether OOP's wife and other family members are aware of Nick's behavior. OOP, you're not wrong, this isn't the first time we've clashed. I thought the previous issues were resolved. For example, when he first started coming to family or holiday gatherings, he would just sit with my dad and watch football, soccer, or whatever while I was hosting and taking care of the kids. He wouldn't even get up to help clear the dishes, even when my dad did. I called him out on it a few times, and now he does help, so I figured he just wasn't raised to be considerate but was capable of change. Then there was the issue of him leaving awful tips for restaurant staff. I assumed it was because of his financial situation, so my wife and I started covering the bill instead since we could afford it. We were already paying for my parents anyway, since my mom doesn't work anymore. So I don't know, he was never my favorite guy, but he seemed to make my sister happy. She had a few terrible relationships before him, so I would pick my battles. He never told me anything as overtly sexist/homophobic as that, so I just figured he was just not my type of guy, but didn't really confront him unless I felt it was warranted. I certainly wouldn't let slurs slide, but I don't recall him really using any in my presence before. And he doesn't really spend any time with my kids anyway, so I was never too worried about his presence around them. As for my sister, she is my sister, and we used to be very close. Hell, before this shit I thought we still were close. But now that I think about it, I think she kind of became more withdrawn these past few years, because we used to talk about everything, especially around my mom's diagnosis. She has multiple sclerosis, and her being so willing to overlook someone talking like that about me actually caught me totally by surprise. Still, I don't know if I want to cut her off completely, but also, obviously I can't just ignore her excusing Nick's behavior. OOP responds to comments on how he chose to work from home and letting his wife be the one who works outside the house. OOP on work-life balance. OOP, I completely understand where you're coming from. When I first graduated college, I had an incredibly demanding job, but it brought me no joy. My wife, on the other hand, absolutely loves her career and is thriving in it, and I'm genuinely happy for her. But for me, work is just work. I do my job well, but it's not my passion. My real priority is being able to afford fun experiences for the people I love. The time I spend with my wife and kids is what truly matters to me. OOP on going low contact with his sister and Nick, but not his niece. OOP, honestly, I think that might be the best approach because I feel terrible for not picking Tracy up, and my kids really miss her. I do want to have an open conversation with my sister once we've both cooled down because, at the end of the day, she's still my sister. But as for Nick? He can go to hell. I won't tolerate this behavior again, and I refuse to be taken for granted. OOP on their financial situation compared to his sister's family. OOP, financially, we're in a better position than they are. Our house isn't bigger, and our cars aren't flashier, but we're completely debt-free. My wife alone earns about as much as the two of them combined, and she has some solid investments. According to her, I don't know much about investments myself. My income is decent, but it's nowhere near hers, more than Barb's but less than Nick's. It mostly covers our recreational activities, hobbies, and vacations. They have a larger house and nicer cars, but they're tied up with a mortgage and loans, so they can't afford to quit their jobs, reduce their hours, or cover childcare costs. That's how we ended up in this situation in the first place. I love Tracy, and I didn't mind helping out. Update. Clarifying a few things. My dad passed away from a heart attack 2 years ago. Given his heavy smoking and generally unhealthy lifestyle, it wasn't entirely unexpected. He had previous heart issues. Despite that, he was an amazing father and grandfather right up until the end. His passing left my mom on her own, and she doesn't work. My mom has MS, which has remained mostly stable but gradually worsens over time, with occasional flare-ups. Stress tends to trigger these flare-ups, and when that happens, she usually doesn't fully recover to her previous level of health. That's why we try to keep her as stress-free as possible. My dad had life insurance, so her house is fully paid off, and she has some financial support. However, she also relies on a caregiver who comes 3 times a week to help with cleaning, cooking, and shopping, something she can't afford on her own, so my wife and I cover the cost. As I mentioned in my original post, my wife and I are in a better financial position than Barb and Bill. They have a more extravagant lifestyle with a big house and expensive cars, but they're also tied down with a mortgage and loans. Reevaluating the situation. The overwhelming response I received made me rethink everything, especially how I could stand my ground without completely cutting Tracy out of my life. I realized there's no perfect solution, I just have to find the best possible way forward. I took the day off work to process everything and figure out what to do. One particular comment really stuck with me. It made me consider how Tracy must feel in all of this. And the truth is, I just can't do this to her. I know this might not be the update some people were hoping for, but I love her like she's my own, and my kids adore her too. None of this is her fault, and I can't bring myself to abandon her. I unblocked my sister because obviously if I'm going to be interacting with her child, she needs to be able to reach me. I talked to my mom during the day and she was, again, distraught about having to pick Tracy up, which is pretty hard on her. I told her I was willing to do it, but I'm coming over and she's going to have to hear me out, to which she agreed. I talked to her for a long time, avoiding snark and lashing out this time, and just explaining that basically how serious Nick was or how he is doesn't matter. I used that rocking the boat analogy someone linked to in comments, and further stressed my point by saying that it shouldn't matter if I was justified or not in getting upset. I am her child, and if something upset me it at least warrants giving me the benefit of the doubt before siding against me, and eventually it seemed to come through. She apologized and we hugged it out, and I think she got it. She's not a very confrontational person and generally really tries to keep the peace, and this time she went about it wrong. I'm not saying I'm not mad, but she's my mom and she apologized. I explained to her that covering for me wasn't helping, it only weakened my position when confronting Nick and Barb. Thankfully, she understood and was receptive to what I was saying. I texted my sister, letting her know we needed to talk and that I'd be dropping Tracy off at their place that evening. She simply responded with a thumbs up. When I picked Tracy up from daycare, she was absolutely thrilled. She stuck by my side all afternoon instead of running off to play, which was adorable but also made me feel guilty. I could see how my absence had affected her. I reassured her as best as I could, making it clear that she wasn't in trouble, and I wasn't upset with her. My frustration was with her parents, and we needed to sort that out. I also promised to do my best not to stop picking her up again, which made her really happy. That evening, after I dropped her off and she was in bed, I sat down with Barb and Nick for a serious conversation. I told them straight up that Mom was no longer going to be covering for them, and if they didn't let me finish what I had to say, I would leave and they could figure out new childcare arrangements for Tracy. I didn't actually mean that, but they didn't need to know. They weren't pleased, but at least they were willing to listen, so that was progress, or at least proof that the threat worked. I laid it all out. I didn't care if they meant their apology, but I was damn well going to need one. This was about principle now. I had spent years helping take care of their child, and if they wanted to act like jerks, I wasn't going to keep doing it for free. So here's how things would work moving forward. I would no longer be dropping Tracy off in the mornings until further notice. Nick's behavior was unacceptable, and there needed to be some consequences. I was done paying for family outings and vacations. Since Nick believed it was a man's job to support his family, he could go ahead and figure that out himself. The only exception? Tracy. She would always be welcome. If I hear any more BS being talked about me behind my back, I was going to start charging them for my service. My plan was to dangle the thing they want, childcare. Restoring it, but at the same time giving some repercussions and threat of things getting hard for them again. I also laid it on pretty thick about how I am a man, so I obviously have my pride and can't have that be disrespected, even by my own family who I obviously love, don't really consider Nick family but figured he wouldn't figure that out. Nick was not happy about this, and my sister actually had to take him outside to talk it out without me, but eventually they did agree to it, and I got my, admittedly half-hearted, apology. I could probably press it further, but I didn't want to risk having to either back down or hurt Tracy again, so I took this. There were no tears and no warm hugs, but I get to walk away with what I wanted, giving them some payback without having to give up my time with Tracy. I still plan to talk to my sister alone about her relationship with Nick and about how she sees me, but I figure I should let things calm down a bit before I do. I know this isn't the resolution some, maybe most, of you wanted, but at the end of the day I need to find a solution I can live with, and for me this is it. We'll update if anything changes. Relevant comments. Commenter 1, you were paying for their family vacations? That's wild. OOP, I always thought I was paying for our family vacations. Honestly, since my wife earns more than I do and manages most of our finances, you could argue she was the one actually footing the bill. Her income covers our home and daily expenses, while mine is more of a fun fund. She was always really excited about these trips because she doesn't have much family left, so having Barb, Nick, and Tracy join us, along with her sisters, made it feel like she had a big family again. To her, that made the expense completely worth it and brought her a lot of joy. Obviously, things have changed now. She's furious with them, and I don't think either of us would feel comfortable paying for them again. Given their financial situation, they probably won't be able to come along without our help. I do hope we can still bring Tracy, though. But as for Barb and Nick? I have absolutely no intention of ever covering costs for them again. The trust we had in their love and good intentions is broken beyond repair. Just because I didn't take my anger out on Tracy doesn't mean that anger isn't there. Their apology was necessary as a sign that they acknowledge my feelings and priorities, but I'm not about to forgive and forget just because I forced them into a half-hearted apology. From now on, I plan to keep my contact with them to a minimum, only what's necessary for Tracy. At some point in the future, I might have a conversation with Barb and give her another chance, simply because she's my sister. But even then, I know now that I overindulged them financially, and that will never happen again. Update. These past few months have been tense, but manageable. I've stuck to my decision about not dropping Tracy off and haven't been covering any expenses for meals or anything else. After realizing the kind of person Nick is, I've been carefully trying to get some one-on-one time with my sister to ask her about their relationship, whether he's isolating her, if she's financially dependent on him, if she's able to go out with friends, and how jealous he gets. Some of her responses made me uneasy, but I can't force her to see things differently. I'm not excusing how she treated me, but I also believe she's in a tough situation herself. I don't want her to become even more isolated, so I'm subtly trying to help her see the reality of it. I've been dropping hints, like comparing Nick's behavior to that of one of her toxic exes, hoping she connects the dots. I don't think she fully realizes how deep she's in, but I know from past experience that pushing her too hard will only make her defensive. Instead, I'm gently guiding her toward the right conclusion while ensuring she knows she always has a place to go and someone who will support her if she ever decides to leave. Nick hasn't really been anything with me. I don't think his feelings about me changed much, but he's basically avoiding interacting with me and has to work a lot when we get together as a family, which I think might be the best outcome for everyone involved. Tracy has been sweet. She's slowly learning to read alongside my oldest, and still enjoys bad words. We just use less mean bad words now. Poop has been a hit. She's now a big fan of the Tom Cardy song, Have You Checked You Butthole? We've been pretty good about making clear the difference between rude words and hurtful words. During the holidays, we took a trip. I think Barb and Nick were initially surprised that I was serious when I said they were welcome to join, but only if they covered their own expenses. The only exception was Tracy, whom I was willing to pay for if they decided to send her along. I had a conversation with Barb about it, leaving it to her to decide how to relay the message to Nick, who was still avoiding me. I assume he didn't take it well, but I had no way of knowing for sure. Barb tried to push back, hoping I would cave, but I stood firm. I reminded her that this wasn't about a single trip, it was about the fact that I once believed they genuinely cared about me unconditionally, and now I know that's not true. That realization isn't something I can just ignore. I explained that standing my ground was important for my own self-respect, and she could either respect my feelings or be upset about it, but I wasn't going to change my decision. The only choice she had was whether to pay for herself or not come at all, and whether to send Tracy with us. In the end, she chose to let Tracy come, and we had an amazing time. My wife, on the other hand, seems relieved to be around Nick less. Apparently, she had a bad feeling about him from the start but wanted me to figure things out on my own. She had hoped he wouldn't turn out as bad as he seemed, but now she's just happy that I'm standing up for myself and that we still get to spend time with Tracy. I still hope that one day Barb realizes the situation she's in. If she ever decides to leave, I will fully support her, even though I haven't entirely moved past what she either thought about me or allowed Nick to say about me without defending me. But at the end of the day, she's still my family. Thank you all for your advice and support.